Hey, what's up YouTube? In this video I'm going to show you how to make this workbench, which will take probably 4 hours to build and will cost just over $100. So unfortunately I don't have a video of my first step here, which was I took about a ½ inch off of each end of this 4x4 post. You really can't trust that the factory cut on these is going to be accurate, so to make sure you get a good right angle and get off to a good start, just trim off the end about a ½ inch like I said, and then whatever's left just cut it in half. So you can see here that not all of these pieces of wood are the same length, and that's fine. We'll take care of that a little bit later on in the video. So what I'm marking here, in between those lines where I'm scribbling right now, we're going to take a notch out, and there's going to be a cross piece that sits inside of that slot. And the goal here is that we really want the weight of the workbench to be resting on pieces of wood that are sitting inside of a notch. That's going to really help this to be a sturdy workbench. In about a minute here I'll give you the measurements for this section so you can jot those down then. Alright, so in the next shot here what you're going to see me do is I'm going to set the depth of my circular saw at 1½ inches. That is the depth of a 2x4, which is actually not 2 inches deep. And with this at 1½ inches, I started by doing those end lines, and then I'm making a lot of cuts really close together. In my next step here, I'm going to take a hatchet and knock these out of there. And now, very carefully, you got to lift the guard of your circular saw. That will allow you to move the blade all the way over to the edge inside of that slot, inside of the notch, and clean it out. I'm going to do the same thing again here. So start with your end lines, and then lots of cuts really close together in the middle. Now lift the guard up with your thumb there and clean it out. Alright, this is the step we're going to deal with that excess length we talked about earlier in the video. What you see me cutting off here, that was a piece of wood that helped us to have something to rest the base plate of our circular saw on while we were doing those notch cuts. If that piece of wood hadn't been attached, the circular saw would have wanted to slip down into the notch a little bit further and make a cut deeper than 1½ inches. So you see the measurements here, 17 inches, 20½ inches, 34½, and 38 inches. And now this piece I'm going to cut at 48 inches long. And these are going to be my cross pieces, which are going to fit inside of the notches we just did. You really want to try to stick to your notch lines very close when you do those cuts, because if the notch ends up being too wide, then it loses its ability to carry the weight, which is really why we're doing this. After pre-drilling those ends, I'm using the speed square just to verify that this is in fact a right angle here. If it's off by even 1/8 of an inch or so up in the middle of the framing, by the time the piece of wood reaches the ground, it's going to be off by probably a ½ inch. So you want to make sure that that's good and square before you screw it down. So a couple years ago I did a similar workbench, but I used 8-foot length cross pieces there, and and then at the top I had a 4x8 piece of plywood that I cut in half also. It's really a similar build. Not too much has to change about the dimensions of anything, just the length of the long pieces has to be 8 feet instead of 4 feet. And then here, this piece of plywood is going to slip down in between the 4x4 posts. So we're taking this little piece off the corner so that that'll give room for the 4x4 posts to sit inside of it. Just like a 2x4 isn't 2x4, the 4x4 post is actually 3½ by 3½. So you want to do a 3½ inch square that you're taking off here. In the next step, we've got to cut 4 pieces of 2x4 to 17-inch lengths, and those are going to connect the two sides of the framing together then. So in all of these, what you see here is I go in straight first and then go at an angle. This is called toe nailing. And if you don't try to go in straight first, then the drill just wants to slide along the piece of wood sometimes. So go in straight and then angle. All right, and then here I'm going to secure this to the frame by toe screwing here. This 2x4 that I'm screwing in now, in the end it's really not going to carry too much weight because the real hefty plywood that we're using on the middle shelf and on the top surface, that's going to be secured to that notched 2x4 only about 3 inches away from there. And here we see the reason why we took the notches out of that piece of plywood before. I'm going to go ahead and secure that down now. And you see me grab my speed square here. I lined that up with the center line on the long 2x4, and that just gives me a good right angle. It tells me exactly where that center support runs through. Now I'm securing this top piece. Again, I pre-drilled this because if you don't, you'll end up splitting the piece of wood. I meant to put 3 screws in at the top right there, and I forgot one. I went back to fix that later on. So in this shot you see there's a horizontal line that goes across right at the top of those posts. I did that with the speed square also. That gives you a real good read as to how deep this 2x4 has to sink down in there. You really want the top surface to be nice and even for the top plywood piece that goes on in this shot. I ran out of my 3-inch deck screws, so I ended up switching over to finish screws to finish this top piece of plywood here. No particular reason other than that. And then I realized I forgot to do that middle support underneath, so in this shot I'm just going back, measuring halfway across to 24 inches, and then I'm going to put that piece of wood underneath there. Instead of trying to hold the drill and the screw and the piece of wood, just put your screws in a little bit, just enough to make them hold. I ended up doing this one a little bit too far, so it got in the way underneath there. But just put them in a little bit, and that way you're only trying to hold 2 things instead of 3. I think I cut this piece of wood pretty tight, so it was really having a hard time budging around in there. Alright, so I'm going to go around to the other side, do those. And then, again, I'm using my speed square. I'm lining it up with those screws, and I think I went in 7 or 8 inches here. But that takes the guesswork out as to knowing exactly where that joist runs through under there. And then here obviously I'm giving the workbench a final sand. I'm paying special attention. I'm trying to get those the edges rounded off a little bit. Also any big splinters that might have flicked off as I was doing these big cuts in the 2x4 and 4x4 posts. Wanted to make sure I got those out of there. I didn't intentionally do this for the camera effect, but it's pretty impressive how much dust is flying off of there. And then I decided to stain it. It stained a little bit darker than I was anticipating. And this underside was a pain because of how rough that plywood was. The middle shelf was a rougher plywood than the top one. So yeah, that's the finished product. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please give it a like and subscribe. I think my next series here will be some lawn and garden hacks and then some home hacks. And yeah, if you have any other requests for videos, you can put them in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.